So are you like a cow or a Dalmatian?
I am the Spot. That's not funny.
We interrupt this program to bring you...
All right, everybody. My name is Kevin.
I'm Adam.
And I'm Julie.
And we are the Real Movie Guys. And welcome back to another episode of The Real Review, the series where we review and discuss all your favorite movies. On today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Miles Morales catapults across the multiverse where he encounters a team of spider people charged with protecting its very existence. When the heroes clash on how to handle a new threat, Miles must redefine what it means to be a hero. Okay, guys. Last time we talked about Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, and unanimously we gave it a 10 out of 10. How do you follow up a movie like that? And I have to even say it myself, where it was a generational movie, I think, as far as animation, superhero movies, everything in general. It's a phenomenal movie. Now, does Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse stand tall with that movie? Comes pretty damn close. I do have some minor issues and some nitpicks I do want to talk about, but overall, Across the Spider-Verse lived up to my expectations. It did what the last one did in spades, even better, while maybe falling back a little bit on a few things, but overall, phenomenal film. It was a really good time, and I got to see some things I thought I would never, ever see, in animation or on the big screen, so kudos to them. They did a fantastic job. Adam, how about you? What are some of your early thoughts on this movie?
To have a sequel that enhances the first one so much is just so crazy to me. Just going back and watching the first movie again and seeing like, holy crap. And it's just like I can start associating all these little hints that they did in the first movie with it, and it's crazy. I had a great time with that second movie, though.
Right, and I'm curious, from what I understand, I don't know if a sequel was planned off the get-go, so if they were able to lay those little nuggets in the first movie and then kind of bring that over to the second one, I think they did a really good job with that. For the most part, I would say it's seamless, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
For the most part. I mean, there's a couple things, maybe like the end of the first movie is a little different than where this movie kind of kicks off. I think is like maybe the biggest difference out of the two, but if whatever, you can kind of like disregard that. It's not a huge deal to me. I think it's forgivable, but yeah, I think this movie does a lot of what the first one does. Again, even better maybe than the first one to some degree. Julie, how about you? What do you think of this movie? Early thoughts?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with both of you. As we were doing our Into the Spider-Verse review, I had to keep holding back because like Adam said, like there's so many things like, yeah, this was great. And then they touch upon it again in the next one, or they build upon it. So they really took a phenomenal movie, all the momentum they had, and they kept pushing it forward. And just, it's the obvious thing. The animation is stunning, jaw-dropping. Like you're watching this and you're wondering, like, how is this possible? Like, how were people able to accomplish this? It truly is a spectacle visually, with a phenomenal story as well.
Yeah, and I think the biggest accomplishment this movie really does have is its visual design, because they took everything they did in the first movie and just duplicated it by 10 million. It's fantastic. It looks even... I didn't think the first movie could look any better, and they did it here, and you could tell how brave they were in their style. You do see some characters focused on earlier in this movie. It's not spoilers, and if there is anything, if anything, we'll maybe have some light spoilers throughout this movie, so if you're super sensitive, I apologize, but I promise nothing like big will be revealed throughout this review. Gwen Stacy is featured early on in this movie, which I think that was an interesting take. I wasn't sure how I was expecting that, for her to kind of open this movie and us get her full backstory. For those familiar with the Spider-Gwen comic, I know Adam has some experience with that. It was right out of the comic book. And for me, for someone who read that actual comic book, page by page from the first couple issues, it was breathtaking to see that animated. I know, Adam, it probably did something for you too, with the watercolor pastel usage and just the way they frame those scenes. I never would have thought I would have saw something like that.
Talk about invoking emotion through color. Like, man, it's just so wild to see Gwen talking to her father and the two different colors and then they blend when they hug,
Right,
or
and it's
when they
funny because
embrace.
it's still images at times, like a comic
Yeah.
book, but it's giving you it has a little bit of movement. Maybe that's the trick that they learned, that there's like a little bit of movement going on to kind of invoke an emotion out of you. I don't know
Right.
what it was, but it was phenomenal when I was watching it.
Giving all that, like making it more fluid.
Yeah.
It's just wild.
Right.
Amazing.
Right. And again, I just want to say that the bravery to do something like that and then jump into another whole animation style once we get back to the Miles Morales universe, where it's the same, but it's also heightened as well. The big villain of this movie, which it's funny because he's a lesser known villain. I remember him from the Spider-Man 90s animated cartoon, was the Spot. He's an interesting character design where he's completely white and he has like little spots that show up on him, and they're like hand-drawn circles, right? They're like these like little blobs that kind of pop up and they're circular. But the other detail that's crazy on him is he has an actual hand-drawn skeletal structure underneath him to simulate that he's like almost hand-drawn and not part of this universe. Like you can see like the circular head with the line through the face where like the facial structure would be, like the shoulders with the circles, for the joints. Who would have thought that was a good idea? And it looks crazy on screen. It's very subtle, but again, it adds almost this comic book / otherworldly feeling to the character that, again, I didn't know I needed, but whoever thought of that, bravo, because that was fantastic. Julie, how about you? Did you have any other thoughts on like the animation style? Because there's a lot to talk about just with that.
Yeah, I mean, just seeing all the large variety of different styles of animation was really cool. There's one character in the beginning too that Gwen fights. That was kind of like a sketch style.
I would say that was spoil. She fights a version of the. I would say she fights.
Be careful.
Yeah, she fights a version of a character who's drawn in a like Leonardo da Vinci style Renaissance painting or Renaissance hand drawn like sketch
parchment.
Yeah, and they actually, and it's weird because they reference it in the movie, and I'm like, oh, am I just seeing that? But no, he actually they reference that, and everything he does is almost like a Leonardo da Vinci type device, and he has like these like different things that he does. It's crazy. When that scene came up, I knew, holy crap, we're in for something really special, because it's just not even just the character himself with like the way he's drawn, but everything around him. This movie took the time to really extenuate the way characters act, to the point where like if say he was like throwing like a bomb, let's say for example in the movie, you would see like little Leonardo da Vinci like calculations would come up on the screen, and they would be accentuated by these different like lines that were not just normal action lines that you would see in an animated project, but they were unique to that character, and that's incredibly impressive in my opinion. And go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, no, with that being, I can't believe I brought that character up instead of the other one, because I know he's in the trailer, so it's not a spoiler. Spider-Punk was, oh my God, the coolest thing I have ever seen on screen. The way that character alone judders between different styles and colors. It was amazing.
Yeah, I remember, I think I read somewhere, and I don't have a source, so sorry, I'm just you're going by Kevin's brain here. I think it was like they had 12 different sections of him were at 12 different frame rates for his body as he was being animated. So there was always like this distinct judder of way the character moved, and his color palette would change and stuff like that. Incredibly unique, and I'm just impressed, and I don't know what made them think to do something like that. Maybe because it is such a punk rock style of character, but every character in this movie evokes the emotion I need them to. Adam, what did you think? Because again, even the scenery, we do jump to a couple different universes, maybe not as many as I thought we would. Again, this is kind of like a part 1 of 2, which is something we'll talk a little bit about later, but the universes that they give us in this movie are all distinctly unique. And I love how the characters almost kind of blend right in with no problems. I really think that's interesting.
Yeah, I think, we saw it a little bit with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, going through all of those different universes and whatnot. But this one, it's just like...
This is what I wanted that to be. Would you make that argument? Yeah,
exactly. It makes them seem like they're actually universes, and we're not just passing through them.
No, like Miles Morales when he goes to the other New York. I can't think of the name of it offhand.
Yeah, it was like Mumbai, New York, or something like that. Yeah, the combination of Mumbai and New York.
Yeah, when he
goes
or
Manhattan.
Yeah, something like that. When he goes to that, it feels like he's an outsider in that world. But again, that's what I want. When you do like a multiversal story like that, it's supposed to be like that. Even they hinted at some funny ones, like they had like Lego Spider-Man was like one that was a joke in there. That made me actually spit out my soda. Julie was like cracking up at me because he's like answering some kind of call on like a thing, and he goes beep boop boop, and I'm like, what the fuck is this movie I'm watching? It got me.
I do want to say, like, now that we're thinking about it, because you mentioned like you thought we would be going to more universes. And that was a complaint that we had with the Disney Marvel Cinematic Universe in the last review, where everything is just kind of surface level to an extent. And that's why we were so impressed with all of the alternate variations of Spider-Man. I think that goes the same for the universes too, like just picking a small handful of alternate universes to kind of really take your time. And like you said, it makes it feel lived in.
Right.
Like every element of those universes was thought out and planned and designed, to the very minute detail. Where again, live action or with the current trend of Disney MCU stuff, we wouldn't be getting that quality.
Right. And I think it's interesting too, is I praised the first movie where they used sound design a lot with like their character development when bringing up characters. Like we talked about like how the Prowler was kind of like accentuated by his sound design. This movie really accentuates its story with visual cues. And I don't know if you guys notice this a lot with like the reflections that are in the movie. A lot of the times you would see like either Gwen or Miles, because they're kind of the two central protagonists of this movie. Whenever they're looking at like a reflection, it's either like they see their face or they see the spider version of their face. And sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's in your face, but that's an excellent technique. You could tell that these animators, maybe they weren't as stressed as some of the ones we've come to know from other like Disney projects and stuff like that. Given the right tools, they can really tell a visual story like nothing we've ever seen before. And again, it's not completely in your face where it's like, oh, hey, pay attention. Look at this visual that we're doing. It's done because it's fun, it's interesting, and it's moving the story along at the same time. A lot of this movie does struggle with identity, which I think is very cool. We've seen that before in Spider-Man, famously Spider-Man 2, where Peter Parker would lose his powers and he didn't, Spider-Man No More, the famous comic where he throws like the suit into the trash can and walks away. This movie doesn't do that necessarily, but it is a struggle with the identity of being a Spider-Man in a Spider-World, and if you're important, if you're not important. And again, that's the next thing I think we need to talk about is the story. I think is really, really good. Is it as good as the first movie's story? There's some things I think that are done a little bit sloppy, but before I get too detailed, Adam, what did you think of the overall story of this movie and what they were trying to do?
I did. I liked it. I did. Right. There was, I guess it kind of dawned on me maybe 3/4 of the way in. I was like, oh, I guess this is going to be like the main bit of the point of this movie. I guess there's not really going to be any sort of solution here or resolution here. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, I guess I was expecting more.
I've noticed in my old age, you can say, that when I go to watch a movie, I like it to be beginning to end. I can just watch it and be done. This movie is definitely not that to any degree. And it always bothers me because I feel like I'm going to have to see the next movie to know truly how I feel about this movie to some extent. Like, agreed. Sure, I'm going to be able to grade this. I'll be able to tell you my initial thoughts, my feelings, everything like that. But the reality of the situation is until I see the next part of this movie, the score is kind of tentative that I would give to you today on this movie, because that finale really is going to impact how well I enjoyed this movie. Because if you're setting up this build and this story and you're crafting this amazing universe, your payoff's not here. It's clearly going to be in the next film. That could be an issue. I do trust the writers. I trust the directors, and I think they're on the right foot. But I have to keep that in the back of my mind. And like you said, I think about when I got to about the halfway point of this movie, I'm like, we're not moving as fast as I would like. So that kind of means that we're going to be stuck somewhere, and I don't know if I'm going to be satisfied necessarily.
Yeah, no, that's pretty much exactly what I was too.
But we can also say, Adam, I think you'll agree with me too, is we were still interested throughout the whole movie. And this movie does have a significant runtime. For it being a 2-hour and 20-minute movie, it didn't feel like it to me. I know some people will say, I know Julie, you had commented before that it did feel a little bit slow in some spots here and there. For me, though, I kept like the mystery and the intrigue of what was going to happen next, where the story was going, kept me on the edge of my toes, I think, the whole time.
Yeah, it was like I was kind of like, I'm ready to go, but I got to see what happens.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
I guess that's how I felt too. I think that's a better way to describe it. Because I was interested the whole time. I did want to see where it was going to go. I knew going into it that it was going to be ending on some kind of a cliffhanger. So I want to say there was at least 2, maybe 3 times where I'm like, oh, this is the cliffhanger. It's going to end here. Mm-hmm. And then it progressed. Oh, not tremendously, maybe another 10, 20 minutes. But within that span, I'm like, okay, this is the cliffhanger now. It's going to cut. And it didn't. Right. Which, again, I'm glad we got what we got. But I felt like that last leg of the movie, not dragged, but I think it just continued on a little bit longer than I anticipated. And like you both said, this movie definitely has rewatchability. However, unlike Into the Spider-Verse, where you could just pop that in, watch it, you're good, done, mm-hmm. You can walk away. When you rewatch this, you're also going to want to rewatch the next movie because it's not a complete story.
Right. And there's a movie I would like to compare this to, but I can't without spoilers, so I'm not going to, because that would just ruin it for everybody. But they wanted to have this particular moment from a very popular sci-fi movie, and they do it. I'll talk to you guys later about it. Probably, what the hell is he talking about? They'd be like, oh, that would have definitely spoiled the movie.
Okay, good, because I was going to ask you.
I know, yeah. No, there's a moment that they wanted to have, and they definitely have it at the end of this movie. And maybe they could have just ended there and been done, which that's kind of what they did to some extent. And they're waiting for the part 2 of this to come out. But I always get frustrated with that, and it sucks because I don't want to take it away from this movie, because I do think this movie is excellent. Everything we're given is exceptionally done well. I think Miles Morales' story is very well developed. Gwen Stacy was very, very much more developed. I feel like we didn't even talk too much about her in the first movie because we just had the whole Spider-Gwen, Spider-Woman character kind of just thrown in the first movie. But here she really gets to live and breathe and have an identity and establish why she is such a popular character at this point. And I think that's really great that they were able to do that. But not just her. They do introduce a lot of other Spider-Man characters. Some old favorites do return in this movie for some very important roles, which I was surprised about. Peter B. Parker, who's in the trailers, that's not a spoiler. He returns and has a prominent role, which I think is, again, I think it's going to be more developed when we get to the next movie where we see what's going on with his character. But for what we got, I think it was really well done. Oscar Isaac was the one I was the most excited for. Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099, is one of my favorite just 90s random Spider-Man characters that are like part spider vampire monster guy with like cybernetic thing. It's kind of like he's like the Batman Beyond of Spider-Man, if you want to look at it that way. I was really excited for his character, and he didn't disappoint. I'm curious to see what they do with him, because again, I think some of his motivation was more Spider-Man to the 100th degree, which I think you can kind of see that through some of the trailers and whatnot. But the other Spider-Man, I don't think disappointed. We got some really fun cameos if you're looking for that. But what this movie, again, like I kind of praised the other Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse for. Across the Spider-Verse kind of does the same thing. When they introduce these characters, it's not like, oh, look who that is. You know who that Spider-Man is? They're actually kind of integral to the plot that they're trying to show. Whether it's a couple of surprise live action segments that are in this movie that I wasn't expecting, or anything like that. Other Spider-Man from other popular media, they all felt truly unique and, again, important to the story and part of the emotions that they were trying to tell with this movie. And again, I think they knock it out of the park with that. I do think this movie is just really well done. How about you, Adam? Was there anything that really stood out to you in this movie? I know a lot of the action scenes were very well done, especially the climax of this movie. Was definitely, I think, a standout, which a lot of people will walk out and remember.
Oh, yeah. Like the whole chase scene is just an incredible scene. It's very... I would love to just go back and just watch that scene again, because I just want to watch all each individual Spider-Man, just to look at their mannerisms and how they run around and stuff like that, just to see how uniquely animated each one is.
Yeah, and I think even like the Miles has an interaction with the Spot earlier on in this movie where he's like fighting him and he's like punching through wormholes and there's like arms sticking out everywhere. That's incredibly hard to do and to make that look engaging. And this movie really does that extremely well. And Julie, would you think maybe one thing I did think about this movie is the tone is a lot darker in this movie compared to the first one. Do you think children will enjoy this one as much as the first one? I could see some kids maybe being a little more disassociated with this movie. This goes to you too, Adam. Do you think they would maybe leave the theater a little less engaged than say maybe the first one? Because a lot of the tones and the questions that are raised in this movie are for sure more serious, I think.
I think that, because again, the climax has the most action. That's going to keep them really engaged. Maybe like parts of the beginning when he's dealing with some of his like family problems, they might not be as engaged. But I think, there's enough, while it is darker, there still is a good balance of humor. And again, just the animation alone is so visually stimulating and engrossing. I think they are going to have some level of engagement. At the end of the day, though, length of almost 2.5 hours, they're going to clock out at some point.
What do you think, Adam? Do you think the comedy took a little bit of a back seat in this movie for some of the more emotional beats they were looking for?
I think a lot more this time around was storytelling as opposed to comedy, like especially in comparison to the first one. I think it's definitely more based on, like, they're obviously trying to get a point across in this one, or trying to get from point A to point B, and here's all the information,
right?
If you can crack a joke here and there, all right, fine, but we have we got an agenda, and not going to stray too far from it.
Right. I mean, I wouldn't say it was overtly, beyond a PG rating or anything like that.
No,
Definitely not.
No, I don't think so.
And they did a good job with that. And that's hard to do too, especially with some of like the more action heavy scenes that they're trying to portray in this movie. I think they did a really good job with that. But they never do forget, which is fun too, that Spider-Man is a wisecracking character from pretty much no matter where he is or what universe he's from. Even one of the more serious Spider-Man has a couple unintentional jokes at times. And I like that because that is organic to the character that we know as Spider-Man, right? Even though maybe the comedy isn't as heavy and in your face in this movie, it's still there because that's who Spider-Man is. He's the wisecracking street superhero that we know and love. And I think that's really good that they pay tribute to that throughout this movie. They did a really good job. But overall, I think Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a really good movie, and I think we're ready to give our final scores. I'm going to give Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse a 9.4 out of 10.
Who do you think you are? Really?
We are supposed to be the good guys.
We are.
This movie is really good. I don't think it's the masterpiece as far as storytelling and visuals as the first movie. I mean, yes, the visuals I think are significantly, which is crazy to say when I really think about it, better than they are in the first movie. This movie is a little more style over substance to some degree, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of amazing sensory things. Like, I could watch this movie maybe 30 times and still not have caught everything that was on screen because there's so much being thrown at me. But I love it. I love every bit of it. I just think the story maybe could have been a little more tighter. And the reason for my lower grade really ultimately, unfortunately, is this is a part 1 of 2. Beyond the Spider-Verse is going to be the conclusion to the Spider-Man Miles Morales story that they're telling here. And until I have that bit of information, I feel like I can't justifiably give this a higher grade until I see where we end up. When I go back and watch this movie as much as I would watch the first one, I don't think so necessarily, because I think the first one just is that much more engaging. And typically when you have I don't want to say an issue, but it kind of is an issue like this where your first movie really heavily relies on your second movie. Instead of the whatever hour and whatever session I'm going to have watching the first movie, I'm going to have to commit to like a almost 4 or 5 hour session, depending on how long the next movie is, just to get the whole crux of the story you're trying to tell. But not trying to take anything away, Across from the Spider-Verse is a really good movie, and I think you guys should check it out. Spider-Man fans especially, you're not going to be disappointed with some of the cameos that are in there. I promise you that. Adam, how about you? What do you think of this one?
I'm going to give Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse a 9.6.
I love chai tea.
What did you just say?
Chai! D-chai means D, bro! You're saying D. Would I ask you for a coffee with room for cream?
Oh, no.
This is the first time in a while that I am considering going back to the movie theater to see a movie again, just because of how great it was. I do agree with you about the story and how I was expecting as something different. My score may change when the part 2 comes out. We'll see. But as a I guess half package, that's where my score will stand.
Right, and I mean, I've said it in the past where Dune was one of my favorite movies for the most recent remake of Dune when that movie came out, and it's a very similar situation to this movie where that movie ends and it's really not an ending, but I absolutely love that movie. But again, my opinion could 100% change if I go into the next half of that movie and I don't enjoy it. It's almost going to feel like a waste of time. I don't think that's the situation with that movie or this movie. I think the next one will be as good, but you just really never know. I really don't know where the story's going to go, and that's also part of the intrigue, I guess, as well. But yeah, I agree with you, Adam. I think my score could change as well, depending on what we get. Julie, how about you? What do you think? Cross the Spider-Verse.
I'm riding that, just saw this movie fresh off that high kind of thing. I'm going to give Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse a 9.8 out of 10.
Miles, being Spider-Man is a sacrifice. You have a choice between saving one person and saving every world.
The only detraction for me really was the length. And I felt like things needed to wrap up a little more quickly. But other than that, I was fully engaged and immersed the entire time. I don't know if I'm going to go back to the theater again, but I'm very anxious for my next rewatch. It was such an enjoyable time. I enjoyed the story a lot. Yes, it's unfinished, so it does hang in the balance with the conclusion. But I just can't wait.
Yeah, it's incredible to see a studio that did such an amazing job with the first one essentially, live up to that potential. I mean, that doesn't happen very often in Hollywood when we see a first one and then a sequel live up to the potential, if not better in some ways. And again, I think the animation here is the star of the show. The story, like I said, I think it just had a few little issues that they could have tweaked out, but it might be inconsequential. Like I said, once we get to the third part and beyond the Spider-Verse, I might be singing a whole different tune, being like, oh my God, look at the genius of all this groundwork that they laid. And what was I talking about? It's happened before. I won't say it didn't, but guys, if you can, it's in theaters now. Make sure you check out Across the Spider-Verse. Again, thank you all so much for joining us for this episode of The Real Review. My name's Kevin. That's Adam and Julie. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. We'll catch you next time.
If you guys like what you've seen here today, consider giving this video a like and leaving your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay up to date with everything Real Movie Guys related, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget, all you audio listeners at home, we are available on many podcasting platforms. Just search The Real Movie Guys, you should pop right up. Thank you again all so much for joining us on this episode of The Real Review. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. Catch you next time.